Anne, are you going to do the questions now?
Yes, there's a couple of them in the chat, and then we'll take them by a show of hands after this. We'll take these two first. From Karen and from Frankie. Do you want to say your own questions, or shall I just read out what's there? Karen.
Well, I mean, all I said, it really struck me when Andy was talking, how much the British agenda is relating to the problems that travellers face, whereas the other speakers were talking more broadly. I mean, I was struck when Marius was talking. He brought up this issue which I noticed in Slovakia, that the Roma are presented as a problem, and even worse, if you read election manifestos, they're presented as a problem that should be solved. And kind of like, if you study 20th century German history, a racial group being a problem that can be solved makes you very nervous. But I also kind of noticed that almost always here, Roma are presented as a problem, which is a problem of education. Oh dear, they can't get jobs because they're not educated, and they've got low work motivation. And I once went through a whole set of election manifestos, and only one mentioned that being discriminated against by the majority population might actually be a problem. And like, you live in an area of high unemployment, you've got low education, and you won't get a job anyway because you'll be discriminated against because you're Roma. I mean, of course, people don't have much motivation to apply for jobs. So, you know, I could see that kind of problem. But yeah, it just really struck me how different the agendas were, which was why I just thought it was so interesting to have speakers who had seen the kind of the Central and Eastern Europeans' perspective of discrimination and the kind of the British one, and sort of, you know, how you deal with it.
Okay, I'll take Frankie's question as well, because it's in some way related about different agendas and discrimination.
Yeah. You want me to give the question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I just think that since the whole upsurge of populism, not only in Europe but obviously pre-Biden now in the States as well, that there has been an uprising of discrimination and intensification, if you like, of discrimination against minority, in inverted commas, groups. And I wonder if Roma people feel the same has happened to Roma communities across Europe, that this has been intensified, and there's been more legislation, such as one instance was mentioned here, so that there's a shared problem amongst, I mean, women, you know, have had a kind of intensification, if you like, of anti-abortion moves in certain American states and in the UK as well, and in other parts of Europe. Hungary, for example, and Vox in southern Spain have all been in favour of putting women back in families and keeping them there and not letting them out very much, and not letting them have access to abortion and things. And so I think that this has happened across a range of groups. And I wonder if the Roma feel that, you know, this is not just UK or the countries that are presented now. It's a graduation I'm talking about, an intensification.
Okay, who would like to answer that first? Any of our speakers? Andy?
Yeah, just to answer that briefly, I think that those two questions were related, and I think they were initially directed at me, at least Karen's was. And the answer, I think, is that discrimination in the UK is partly different and partly the same, by which I mean, yes, there is among Gypsy and Traveller communities in the UK, but not so much amongst Roma community. There is still a strong tradition of travel, of nomadic ways of life, and often the conflict points are when that happens, and that results directly from the lack of sites. So therefore, if you're travelling and you have to stop, and there is no, so I think that there's estimates of about 300,000 being about the population of Gypsy Roma Traveller population in the UK. I think that may even be just be England and Wales. And there are just over 300 transit pitches in the UK. Now, obviously not all those 300,000 are travelling, but that gives you an idea of the problem. And you get those pinch points because you get both traveller families who have nowhere to go and local communities who then start creating a fuss because there's an encampment on the common or on a piece of land, and then there's all the issues, you know, we're familiar with. So, but having said that, discrimination is discrimination, and it is largely racist discrimination. And that's certainly true against the Roma in the UK, who are a more recent population and are generally settled, and a lot of whom have come to the UK fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe or elsewhere, to find perhaps a slightly less intense persecution, but still a lot of discrimination in the UK. So yes, there are different manifestations, and I'm sure I'm not an expert in this at all, though we have had some very good presentations about what life is like for Roma in Europe. Yes, there are some very profound differences, but overall, this is about the victimization and discrimination against minority communities who are already severely disadvantaged. And in that sense, I think there is a lot of similarity.
Okay. Nicu, do you have some answers to provide as well?
Yeah, I was going to give one example of like a direct discrimination towards Roma, and not only in UK but also in Europe. So when the pandemic started, there were lots of news saying that the Roma are the agents of spreading the coronavirus. So in the media, you would see news, oh, this group of Roma gathered together and the virus spread. And I was not only in the Eastern Europe news, it also was a situation in our in our city, actually in our ward where I live. And at some point, I've got some phone calls from the local police and local authorities asking, why do Roma, are, not following the social distancing rules, and why they are disregarding the government recommendations on social distancing. So I took a video of what happens on the on the high street where we live, and show that not only Roma are not socially distancing, but it was everyone else not wearing masks. And I said, well, that would be a very dangerous message, saying that the Roma are not following the guidelines. It's just people hanging out, doing what they used to do normally, because it was new. People didn't know what to do when we first introduced the lockdown. So it was that situation, and I said very strongly, let's not put that on a community and send the wrong message. And they got the message, and they stopped trying to say only the Roma. So these type of situations that was one example, but you would see that whenever something terrible happens, you would see the less disadvantaged minority being at blame for what's happening. So that's one good example I was going to give.
Right, thank you, Nicu. I have a few hands up. Presumably some of you want to ask some different questions, but Marius has his hand up as he's one of the speakers. I'll take Marius next.
Thank you very much, Anne. very good point made by Karen, that problematization it's embedded into the ideology of the 20th century. But what I want to pin out, it is that this problematization, it has kind of a recurrence in the time of crisis. And actually in the last book that I edited together with Andrew Ryder and Nidhi Trehan, we look at this aspect of how in the time of crisis, Roma, Gypsy and Traveller and other minorities in general, but with focus on RGT, they are scapegoating. How, for instance, the example of Nicu in academic wording, it's called the moral panic, when women, when other minorities are allegedly guilty for the current situation. However, the point made by in the second question, the uprising of discrimination, this is the crisis overall, frankly. It's boosting some negative energies towards other people. But to me, the anti-abortion movements from Poland and America, and maybe from Brazil as well, should work in fraternity with the Roma women that have been sterilized in Czech Republic and Slovakia. So fraternity among women and fighting for their rights for reproductive health, and to be a little bit more non-academic, to take decisions about what they will do with their womb. It should put them together rather than separate different form of discrimination. But actually, this is the way I see that this level of individualized approach of neoliberalists and right-wing party and the left that still believe into the common values, into the community approaches and civil rights of women, of LGBT, of other disadvantaged and discriminated group. So to me, to conclude, in a time of a crisis, we shouldn't count the type of discrimination and to prioritize them, but rather put it them in on the umbrella, create a kind of synergies, put the community to work in general against discrimination rather than sorting out and prioritizing a problem or another. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marius. I'd just like to point out that, you know, there is a strong connection between women's reproductive health and Roma issues, because Roma women have a much higher death rate in childbirth. There's a much higher rate of infant mortality. There's generally a much shorter lifespan for Roma people and women in particular. So this is an instance of intersectionality of the different aspects of discrimination. So thank you very much. I have next Jenny, Leah. I take three at a time, I think. I have 4 hands up, but we'll take 3 to start with. Jenny, then Leah, and then Peter.
Yeah, I just want to say a little bit really about some of the, I used to work in the voluntary sector before I retired, and I worked with projects to do with asylum seekers, refugee families and migrant families. And we work closely with other members of the voluntary sector in doing that. And one of the things that is in common with all of those groups actually is the lack of effort that's put into helping those communities understand how UK systems work. And as a result, they don't get the benefit of those systems. With the Eastern European Roma that became part of that project, there was the additional thing, which was that the level of discrimination, you know, sheer racism, for want of a word, that they experienced in their mother country led them to be really distrustful of the normal sort of government departments and services and things like that. And on top of that, this is where they share it with migrants and asylum seekers and refugees. They don't even know how it works, even if they can get over the mistrust. They don't even know how the system works in order for them to be able to target in on the benefits that was entitled to them. And because of that, and because of a discrimination that speaking to them, discrimination that they felt, you know, that they experienced back in Eastern Europe, and the fact that they were excluded from systems, you know, it was legislated that they were excluded from systems, right? It was legislated in it, and because of that, a lot of them had to develop other ways of behaving and surviving, which when they arrived in the UK didn't work, you know, because it's a different system. And I think that's something that often not enough attention is paid to actually addressing those issues about access to services, how you do it, how things work. Yeah, just stuff like that. And in Spain, we have a Roma community, but it's interesting because the Roma community has two broad sections in it, and one is that the sort of Eastern European Roma, often called the Hungaros, and then you've got the other Gitanos who are Spanish born. And it's really interesting in Spain because, of course, flamenco is forever linked to Spain, but flamenco is incredibly linked to the Roma community as well as culturally. And Gitanos in Spain are probably suffer more than anybody else from access to education, for example. But also there is a tension between the Spanish Gitanos and as they're called, Hungaros. And so it's quite complicated, but definitely discrimination. You know, they're thieves, you know, they don't do a day's work, you know, all that sort of stuff, are not educated and everything like that. So I just think more attention, instead of saying, what we need to say is that our governments and our systems are the problem, not we have a problem with, but in fact, it's not about, it's about us reaching out to them, not them trying to reach in to us, really. And I think more time needs to be spent on accepting that we discriminate and doing something about that. And that includes helping them to access the systems that help them. That's all I wanted to say.
Just first of all, want to say thank you so much to the organisers and the speakers. This was really, really interesting. And also a special hello to Nick, because he is representing my city, Newcastle. But I'm, of course, living in Madrid. And actually, I wanted to ask a question which is connected with what Jenny was just talking about. So as you might know, I'm pretty sure you already know about the history of Gypsy and Roma in Spain. Madrid actually has the largest shanty town in Europe. They call it a shanty town, but to be honest, it's very developed anyway. It's where I think it's basically majority Gitano, and there are various different groups. So we've got the Gitanos, we've got the Roma, and we've got different types of Gitanos. We've got the ones whose family history goes back hundreds of years, some whose goes back 100 years, and others who are wealthy, and others who live in the shantytown. And my question is actually more about terminology. In Spain, it's worn with pride in many circumstances to say soy gitano, but the direct translation, which is gypsy, is also seen as derogatory. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to translate it, how to write about it, because I'm a journalist and it's something that I ask a lot. But in Spain, the response I get from the Gitano community is that, you know, I'm a gypsy and I'm proud, but if I'm writing that, I would get a lot of criticism. So I often just use the word Gitano. So any thoughts on how I can address this?
I'll take Peter next before we go for some answers, and then I'll take some more.
Okay, so I'm a simplistic fool. I have a statement and a challenge. Travelling peoples exist, and I believe that their communities enrich our European and Asian heritage. I underline that last word because of where I live. So my only thought is that one should go and get to know them and drink tea in their caravans and mobile homes and listen if we want to understand their problems.
Okay, thank you, Peter. We're near the 1.5 hour time limit. Is everyone okay if we carry on for another half hour? Looks like we got more questions and more to say about this. No objections?
Apologies for me, I've got another Zoom, so I'm going to have to, I didn't know you were going on after 8 o'clock, so I'm going to have to leave you now.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks, Andy. Again, your contribution was very welcome today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Right, so I see Katalin has her hand up. Do you want to answer some of the comments that have been made and questions?
Maybe I would like to reflect on last question.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
Because there's a quite similar issue in Hungary. I think legally it is prohibited to say gypsy to someone. Although Roma people often call themselves also in Hungary gypsy. But when someone else tells them that look at this gypsy, or you are a gypsy, just stating it without any intention to insult someone, it may be offensive. And the reason for this is that when a Roma person, but this is just my point of view, talks about itself, let's say, as a gypsy, the idea that pictures in their head is something different than that pejorative meaning, let's say what the majority thinks when they see gypsy. Usually in Hungary, when you say gypsy, it refers to a certain behavior, not, for example, a certain culture or language or something related to nationality. And that is why it may be offensive when, as an outsider, you even just to write about or just describe or do a research and mentioning Roma people as gypsies can be offensive, while in real life they call themselves, because there are two different pictures in the actors, in the head of the actors. Maybe this answers your question.
Kind of. What should I say? Katalin,
this is a hard question. I think you should go with the politically correct version, with what they like to call themselves, because that is what I think they most probably identify themselves, what they feel comfortable with. So when you go there, do, for example, a field research, and you ask them, what do you call yourself, like what are you? And they feel confidently that this is what I am. And when you ask it, okay, I'm going to write it down like this, no? And is it what you would like to be presented? Are you okay with that? And I think they can conceptualize if that is okay or not, to see themselves in the position.
So it depends on the context and how they identify. In some cases it's Roma, in some cases it's Gitano. In those separate cases, I should say either Roma or Gitano.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I say something about this?
Just a minute. Paula had her hand up. I think Paula had some interesting things to say. She says, and we have some extra time. So Paula, can you go ahead?
Yes, well, one was a bit of a call for any thoughts on access to healthcare. So Semran brought up that, Semran, apologies, brought up that during the pandemic that has kind of exacerbated the inequality in access to healthcare. But I know that is a problem that has not come just from the pandemic. It's been a long-standing issue. My work in Vienna is based on increasing access to healthcare for people who were excluded from the social security systems and their entitlements, predominantly in the field of homelessness, but there is obviously a huge crossover with other excluded groups who may be trying to access services without the correct social security entitlements, having paid into systems, etc. Yeah, so one was a call for any good practice that the speakers know of or anyone on the call knows of that might see where it's working well, or at least some principles that should be applied to access. And then the second was actually a question for Andy, but he's disappeared, which was specifically around the Labour position on healthcare. I wanted to dig a bit deeper into what Labour was saying on the topic of healthcare, but I missed my chance.
Oh well, I'm sure you'll have another chance. We'll follow it through if you remind us about it sometime. Paul, what do you want to say something now? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Remember that wonderful Mr. Blair had his code word: education, education, education. Now, I lived in Perpignan in the south of France for a year, and there was a big gypsy community there, 4,000. And a friend of mine worked on an education project there, and he found school attendance very, very difficult because there was a long tradition of children being used as work. Fast forward to South Yorkshire, my friend was in social worker there, and again, there was a problem with attendance at schools. Without education, there's no possibility. I think the good thing is the idea of issuing computers, laptops out, might well be, if it's done in an organized way, might get round the problem. But does anybody get any comments on, first of all, do they agree that attendance is low because it's anecdotal? And secondly, if it really is so, why is it so?
Right. I'd like to add something about education as well, because I did for a while live on a traveller site in Ireland. It wasn't by choice, but it was a very interesting experience. Well, I lived there.
I'm sure it was.
But very interesting. This was Irish travellers. You could say the kind of the wildest ones who hadn't ever been settled, and the policy at the time was to herd them together into big sites instead of them staying in their traditional local area where people would know them. And I've also, currently I live in a Slovak village near the Czech border where there's quite a big Romani population. Some of my neighbours in my street are Romanis. And education is obviously a problem for both in different ways. Because Irish travellers, quite a lot of them do move around. And of course they do have face discrimination as well. Sometimes settled people don't want their kids to go to school with travellers. They do move around, and they're also quite busy doing stuff like scrap dealing, and the kids join in with the work at a young age. And horse dealing and gathering scrap, going out begging. So they're quite busy. Now here in Slovakia, I discovered in my village, the problem is that the Roma children most of the Roma children don't go to the village school because there's a test to access primary school. There's a test they have to do. Because they haven't had preschool education, they don't pass the test. So they get sent to a special school in the next town, in fact, the town where this office is. So they have a different education. It's probably a different quality of education as well. Now, I have heard some people saying that the Roma prefer to have their education separately from settled people, but that seems to be wrong to me anyway. So I'm wondering what we can do, because that's probably the key to everything. I mean, it's well known that if you educate women all around the world, in all the developing countries, that has the best effect on improving everyone's lifestyle. So, getting the kids educated, but particularly the girls, is very important. Paul, did you want to say something else, or is your hand still up?
No, not really, but you're exactly right about, we think, well, child labour in some societies isn't much, but you're right. In some communities, particularly with steel, for example, kids can work with scrap, you see them, and they will work this. By the way, there was also use from farm labour in Scotland. Gypsy children were used illegally, but they were used under workmasters until quite recently. And for all I know, they might still be used. So where there's a market and where there's money, negative things will happen.
Yeah. I did come across a teacher from a school in another village, somewhere in this region, who said they had all the Roma children at their school and everything was fine. And they thought it was all, she thought it probably a more progressive school than, I don't know if this is a national law or whether the different areas or regions can have their own policies about this. But it certainly is possible to educate them all together. Possibly they might need some extra tuition. A friend of mine who teaches in kindergartens was talking about setting up a special kindergarten for Romani children. She was going to hire a container or something. That was her plan. But I mean, I think they deserve a proper building to have it in something. So how can, and my main question, if nobody else has any, is how can we be allies? We're all spread out in different countries. How can we be allies? How can we help to improve these things? Marius, do you want to say something else? Your hand is up.
Yes, just a short reaction about the education, and actually it's touching upon a little bit of description of the one of the biggest shanty town in Europe. It's nearby Madrid. This shanty town has been developed by the negligence or non-intervention of political actors and the policy makers. This is more than 100 years ago, and now they are claiming in a racist version that Roma, Gypsy, or Gitanos want to live in such a inhuman condition. By the way, the same thing, it's how appear one of the biggest Roma Mahala or one of the biggest Roma municipality in Europe, Shutorizari, the community that Semran talk, in the same thing. The community appear as a result of non-intervention and not delivering any houses to Roma in the 60s as a result of an earthquake. So the Roma that were affected by the earthquake in the 60s, they were leave to settle in one land at the outskirts of the municipality. And this is how actually the community grown little by little there. And now they are saying that yes, Roma, they want to live in a informal community in the way they like, without infrastructure, without sewage, without water, etc., etc. And by the way, the people that are talking Semran, undocumented people, you know how they are recognized by the authorities and in a vernacular of the community? They are called host people, ghost people, like that they are spirits and they are not people. And majority of them, they are actually internal displaced people, victims of the war. Their houses were bombed. They were victim of direct violences during the Yugoslav wars. And they settled in Macedonia, and now some of them are at the second or a third generation, and the phenomenon, it's perpetuated. Just as a parenthesis. As it's coming with the schooling, I want to tell you a couple of statistics. And one, it's about school segregation measured in the regional level, and demonstrated that at the European level, including the UK, was involved at that time in a measurement. The Roma people are segregated. 10% of the Roma people are segregated. This was 6 years ago, almost half. So from 5% to 10% in less than a decade. So this is the trend of the European education policies, to segregate the Roma, while some politicians are saying that yes, they like to stay together, they don't like education. Second argument, it is that these uneducable Roma, or hard to be educated, this is coming also from the old belief during the 20th century, like Nazis ideology demonstrated, like and even their experiment of Eva Justin and other people with the eugenist vision, that Roma children do not like the school. You mentioned on the examples of how the people are clustered in Slovakia and in Czech Republic nowadays with a simple administrative tools. So they are streamed in what is called special schools for people with the light mental retard. And by default or by chance, 90% of this school population are Roma, which even statistically cannot be demonstrated, because on average at the European level, the rate of disability is from 2.5 to 3.5. So Roma cannot be 90% of their children disabled to be enrolled in that school. And the last year, it was a national coverage study about how the minority children, it was published in the Guardian, I think it was last week on Thursday, if I could remember, on Friday, I think Thursday it was, in the Guardian, how the minority children are filling into the UK schools. It was statistics and case studies are also covering the RGT. Now, that the education is the key indeed, but the education at the end, it's a political act. Education, it's driven and decided in the parliaments, in the local parliaments, it's financed and directed, and even the test that Anne mentioned, it's administrated by clerks under the political command of a mayor and local government. So this is the practical part of the education. Not to talk about the ideological part of education, where UK wants to make you a good UK citizen, Romania by default in their ideology wants to make you a Romanian citizen, but it's excluding you if you want to express any sense of your identity and representation, etc., etc. So if we look deeply, education is not something that it's abstract. Education, it might be change and it might be improved through political acts, through political decision, to involvement. It was here mentioned by some people, even additional support. Additional support, it doesn't mean to separate, it means to add, it means to keep it mainstream, it means to find solution into existing settings. So to me, and to also look a little bit of Anne's suggestion or practical proposal, how we will succeed to cooperate, how we will succeed to merge our efforts from now on. I think the very first step, we did it today, that we met, that we listen each other, we exchange. Maybe we didn't fully agree with some of the statements, but remaining in touch, having a continuous dialogue and learning from each other in a meeting like that, and thanks God if the pandemic will be gone, to be there, to look for solution rather than ideology. We are here, and if we are asked, I think we will give you our full support, best of our power and knowledge. And we have example that we can be active and we can do things at the local level, and why not at the national level. Nicu, on Stoica, it's here, and it's a life example, and he can share with you how he would continue the communication within the party, and how we can put you in contact with our friends of ours and networks. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Marius.
Let me just make a small point there, following on from, excuse me, what Marius said. Twice in the history of UK Gypsy Roma Traveller politics, there's been a Labour campaign for Gypsy Roma Traveller rights. There was one very active in the 80s up until the early part of New Labour. Then it kind of stopped meeting, stopped functioning, and we reformed it in about 2002, and it was very active for 10 years. And out of that came this all-party parliamentary group. Out of it came an umbrella group for the different Roma Gypsy Traveller NGOs. Maybe one thing, when, you know, after Nicu has been successfully elected as a Labour councillor, when you're more established in Doncaster, Marius, you can get into some kind of dialogue with Andy Slaughter and some of the other Labour MPs and councillors about reforming a Labour campaign for Gypsy, Roma, Traveller rights. And Thomas Acton will be one person you need to speak to. He was chair of both of the previous Labour campaigns, and is standing in the local government elections again, so he might be a councillor also in the near future.
Thanks, Andrew. Peter.
Yes, I'm feeling a little depressed because I think I live in a different planet to the rest of you, because we don't have a Roma or Gypsy problem in St. Petersburg, because there aren't any, because they are automatically deported to the border of the oblast and removed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the initial problem of rights to anything just don't exist. I am sorry to provide an air of gloom on this, but it's a reality for here that people need to recognize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking up the figures. In fact, in Russia, officially there are 152,000, but probably up to 400,000 Roma in the whole of Russia. So they do exist, but yes, if the authorities don't want them to exist, they officially don't exist. Frankie.
Yeah, I wanted to come back on what you said, and because to me, one of the things that I've been thinking is that Labour International is quite uniquely placed, really, because it's a political party that's linked to one specific nation, but it does have people that are so disparately located globally. And so it's quite an interesting position. I mean, we can learn from Peter about deportation, and we can learn from somebody else about, like yourself, about tests that have to be taken, which reminds me of the inappropriateness of the old IQ tests applied in schools to Black people and people from other races to whom they were culturally quite alien, and they had to be adapted. And so we can find out, I mean, we could find out information and share the information, and information is quite a good player, quite a good combatant. What word am I looking for, Anne? Information's, well, it's quite a good warrior, really. I mean, we need to be able to have information before we can actually expose what's going on. And in Labour International, we're in a very good position to be able to collate that information and request it, and and summate it. I don't know whether that's a useful comment or not.
Oh, sure, it is.
I just thought, if we could gather together information from different people, it's like having a correspondent in New York and St. Petersburg, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And we should do more with this, really. We should do more with this fact that we've got representatives, as it were, everywhere, and we can find out what's happening in lots of different places.
Yeah, for sure, Frankie. I was interested in what Marius said about, like Roma like to live in poor conditions. This is said also of Irish travellers, the same kind of thing. They like to live in these conditions. If you give them anything good, they'll destroy it. Occasionally they do. Maybe it's because we give them, they haven't been able to decide what we give them. They've been given what some official thinks they should have. Sometimes it's because they need some bit of training in adapting to a more settled life, if that's what they're going into. And then sometimes it's just because they're not provided with the same services, like removal of rubbish, for example. They don't have those services, and then everyone complains, oh look, they're full up with rubbish. They don't, you know, and of course they're doing their work, which is important work, like recycling scrap. I mean, I noticed when I was living in County Clare in Ireland, there was a rubbish dump where people used to go to, I mean, farmers used to go to find, say, empty plastic buckets they could use or bits and pieces. And the travellers used to go, of course, recycling stuff, parts from fridges and scrap metal. And then the dump was closed because it was an environmental hazard, that's true. But it seems it's okay. These people were called scavengers. Whereas if you set up a little business with a nice van saying waste recycling, you were okay and you could get business. But if you were a traveller or a gypsy doing this kind of thing, or even an ordinary poor person, you were called scavengers. So, and a lot of this is very similar to apartheid in South Africa, that the black people didn't really want any better conditions. They were quite happy, and you know, they didn't want, you know, same when slavery existed in the United States, that they preferred being slaves. They had a better life that way. So this is a very common theme that's gone on through the centuries, that, you know,
Great legitimizer.
Yeah.
Legitimizes.
Yeah, carry on, Frankie. Yeah, just
no, I was just going to say that, I mean, what you're talking about legitimizes is a great way that people have legitimized discrimination by saying that's what people prefer.
That's what they want, or they wouldn't be able to cope with anything better, or, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, we're probably near to wrapping up. Would anyone like to say anything to finish the session? We haven't heard from Jon recently. Oh, Nicu, I mean Nicu. Or Semran.
I was going to reply to Leah about the question about the terminology, but I sent her a message in private, so. Well,
we'd like to hear your reply if you'd like to tell all of us.
I'll try to make it like real quick. And the thing is, it's a long debate. But actually, the word gypsy comes from Egyptian.
Yeah.
Whilst its translation into, you know, Eastern European languages and Germany, it has another root, which comes from Atiganos, which means untouchable or unclean. So very often there's, you know, the offensiveness of the term gypsy, usually when it's associated with the word that comes from, you know, from the Eastern root, and the translation is a problem. But and I recommended to Leah is to use what the, you know, the local group would use in their countries, because, you know, if translating Gitanos with gypsy might be, you know, not offensive, but might be not very correct for that particular group. So I think in each country, every ethnic group has the right to adopt a denomination and to stick to that. So because, you know, coming from Romania, I was saying, oh, Roma would be the correct and the generic term, but it's not. You know, my experience of living in you know, in Western Europe taught me otherwise. And I think, you know, I don't think gypsy is a, you know, derogative term, but I think every group has the right to identify and call themselves as they feel accurate and, you know, representative for them. So that was basically the idea. Anyway, I wanted to say thank you for having me in this meeting with you tonight. And I hope to see you next time and to share my my winning in the elections. And I'm looking forward to get involved to become the first Roma councillor in UK. That would be a historic moment, but obviously we'll speak about that next time in my capacity, my new capacity as a counselor. So thank you all for having me tonight.
Thank you very much.
Fingers are crossed for you, Nicu. Just talking about the word, yes, Cigan would be a word they use here in Slovakia as well, spelled slightly differently from the German. One of my neighbours asked a young Roma boy whether he preferred to be called Cigano or Rom, and he said Rom. So that's what you do, you ask them what they prefer. Semran is next.
Yes, I also I think Nick said a lot about what I wanted to say to Leah regarding the term Gypsy, Tsigan, or Roma. For example, in Macedonia, which be in Macedonian, Tsigan would be also a slur. I remember, for example, when I was studying at CEE, and one of the instructors gave us a text which every second word was Gypsy, and you could tell by my face that I was not happy with it, because for me that is kind of derogatory term, because generally the word Tsigan or Gypsy or whatever, it's not in the vocabulary of the Roma language. For example, in the Roma language, you don't have that word, but you do have Roma, which could be kind of translated to human or a person or something like that. So, but yes, I do agree. People have the right to call themselves as they think that it's suitable for them. So I do agree with Nick that in a particular country or a particular person, you should ask them how do they identify as. So, and which term for them is the most suitable.
Yeah, I've noticed Roma musicians quite often call themselves gypsies, but I mean, black people can call themselves niggers, but nobody else should call them niggers. It's something you can call yourself. I mean, women, we sometimes call ourselves girls, but I would object if men started calling me a girl if they were a man. It's an equivalence. Anyway, Marius.
Yeah, thank you for putting this meeting together. And I think I'm new in the UK. I will soon settle to Doncaster, and I'm looking to stay in touch with you. You have my contacts. If not, you can double check with your long-time fellow Andrew Ryder.
Yes.
And my fellow as well. So we work and we share some of the ideas in the last 12 years in Budapest. Yeah, let's look further to communicate, to remain in touch, and why not to disagree on some subjects. At the end, if my energy and my thoughts will serve community and will be able to save at least a couple of souls, I think that our mission will be completed. So, or our fight will work to do it. Thank you very much, and looking forward to stay in touch with you. And I wish Nicu success and finger crossed. And let's do history in Newcastle on time. First Roma councillor from the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Take care, Nicu. Take care, everyone, and see you next time.
Right.
Thank
Katalin,
you very much.
Katalin, you've been fairly quiet. Do you have anything just to say to finish off the meeting?
I would like to reflect on your request. Let's say, what should we do to make actually something regarding the party, for example? And I think it would be a great initiative, especially because recognizing the untapped opportunities that rely in votes, in Roma votes, or just as I mentioned in my speak at the beginning, to realize the importance of representation, offering something that addresses Roma people, because that is missing almost everywhere in many countries, even in the European level. And I think there is a gap in the market, let's say, which is open, and I think we should really do something about it at an international level. And in Hungary, I think that that could be a good soil for it. So I'm really open, and really thank you for inviting me. It was a great experience, and I hope to see everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you, Katalin.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Semran and Marius, do you still have your hands up, or did you want to say something else? No, okay. I think that will round us off very nicely. So thank you everyone for coming. It's been very interesting. We certainly will carry this forward in other ways, and we'll let everyone know what we're going to do. And particularly thanks to Andrew, who's now gone because he has a child to look after. But he was the main motivator in getting this all together. So we want to thank Andrew for that as well.